Hi, this is Passion Page. You're listening to TV Confidential.
On the air.
Ed Robertson, along with guest Paul Myers. Paul's latest book, John Candy, A Life in Comedy, is a heartwarming portrait of one of comedy's most beloved and enduring stars. From Candy's humble beginnings in sketch comedy with the Toronto branch of Second City to his rise to fame in SCTV and such Hollywood film classics as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, The Great Outdoors, and Uncle Buck, John Candy captivated audiences with his self-deprecating humor, emotional warmth, and his gift for improvisation. Paul Myers tells the full story of the man behind the laughs through the people who knew him best, including such close friends and colleagues as Dan Aykroyd, Catherine O'Hara, Dave Thomas, Joe Flaherty, Andrea Martin, Martin Short, Jennifer Candy, John Hughes III, James Hughes, Paul's brother Mike Myers, our mutual friend Robert Crane, and many, many others. John Candy, A Life in Comedy, available wherever books are sold through House of Anansi Press, houseofanansi.com, as well as Amazon.com, where books are sold online. Paul has several appearances coming up, both in the U.S. and in Canada, over the next several weeks. For details and more information, go to houseofanansi.com and type in John Candy, A Life in Comedy book tour. Before we went to break, Paul and I were talking about how one of the most endearing aspects of John Candy as a person was how sensitive he was to the needs of others, and particularly when he saw that others were being done an injustice. Whether a small injustice or a large one, Candy would stand up and speak out on their behalf. As we pick up the conversation, our mutual friend Robert Crane tells the story. I forget which movie he was promoting, but there was a nonprofit organization, the National Scleroderma Foundation. He connected with the woman who founded it, Sharon Monsky. Sharon Monsky had scleroderma, a debilitating skin disease. And PM Magazine, which was the local TV equivalent of Entertainment Tonight back in the 70s and in the 80s, they wanted to do a John Candy interview, and John Candy said, I'll only do this if you give me an opportunity to talk about my friend's nonprofit organization, and I want her on camera. Well, her skin disease was that it was really bad, and the producer of the segment thought it was a bad optic, and they tried to frame her out of the shot, and both John and Bob picked up on that right away, and John stopped and said, she's going to sit right next to me, and if she's not part of the shot, I'm not doing this interview. I'm doing this for her. And that's just one of many examples of that. He knew that this was more important to her, for Sharon, than it was for him. And so he made sure that she got her national airtime.
Yeah, that story is like one of many, and not surprising, and completely true to the guy who, sadly, I never met, but I can tell you that I feel like through Robert Crane, who was with him a great deal of the time at that time, I really got a sense of what it must have been like in the eye of the hurricane that was John Candy, his life. He was a whirlwind. Everywhere he went, he was the center of it. It's hard to remember that to people, actually explaining to people who weren't there or weren't live yet, people who might have just seen Planes, Trains, and Automobiles at Thanksgiving. You got to remember, there was a time when comedy stars were also the biggest movie stars, and action stars too. But comedy stars were box office, and people who made people laugh were beloved, and everyone wanted a piece of them. And those films were making money for people, so it was a very different climate, and it was a very centralized climate. You only had 3, 4 networks, even maybe not even 4. And it was just the beginning of the 4-network system, and then that was way before streaming, and way before the millions of sub-networks and multi-channels, and everybody went to the movies to see a movie, and then they all talked about it at work. There was no, there was late-night talk shows, but that was about it. There was no internet. The whole world was different.
Yeah, it wasn't as fractured as it is today. In that today you can watch Jimmy Kimmel's monologue or Stephen Colbert's monologue or on your own time. You don't have to watch it when it airs at 11:30. In fact, in the day and age of internet and smartphones, you can catch, at least here on the West Coast, you can catch it like within 5 minutes after it airs on New York because it's on his team posted online. So you can watch it whenever you want, and it's not quite the same as it was in John Candy's era, where it was still more of a shared experience, both going to the movies together and watching certain things on television.
Yeah, and it was much more close to a monoculture. And now there's things about that aren't as good because there weren't as many diverse voices, and the monoculture has good and bad aspects to it. Now we have a broader range of stories. You would get like Reservation Dogs today, a story about Native American people, and you wouldn't have got that on like the big three networks years ago. And on the other hand, everybody watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles at the theater and would talk about it. And so those people, like I said, become the only stars, I did a lot of research into that era, and there are several great books about just how big business it was. So when a film was a hit, and when it didn't perform, everybody involved was really surprised, or really hurt, and Candy had a few of those too, and so there was definitely a different climate. And that's all I wanted to do is let someone reading this today, we have the benefit of 31 years now to look back and do a little bit of a exit interview of what happened in those years. And for me, I just want to say this. I started out my life purely as a musician and songwriter. I started writing a band newsletter because I wanted to tell people what my band was doing. I started to realize I like writing, started writing about other people, and there's this whole thing about what I love doing is I become a historian is what I'm getting to.
Yeah.
I become a historian by accident.
Yeah.
Because now I'm like in my last 3 books, I think I've basically spent most of my time going, what happened there?
Yeah.
What happened there? And like I said, I'm so glad that by the time I got to write the John Candy story, I'd gotten a lot more used to being able to work in that method.
Yeah, your experience has given you gravitas to tell the story in a way with such depth that you may not have been able to do had you embarked on this or attempted to embark on this 30 years ago.
Exactly. It's like sometimes I felt like Columbo. You know what I mean? I was just like, I noticed you said this. What did you mean by that?
Yeah.
You're far too smart for me, Lieutenant Columbo.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I digress.
Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back.
One more item. If you're starting a company, particularly one that is in an emerging market, you know that averting any sort of legal dispute is crucial to your business plan. Our friends at Tectonic Law offer an array of services that can help you avoid and preempt future litigation while also developing and protecting your intellectual property and intangible assets. Tectonic Law serves the needs of a host of emerging industries throughout California and beyond, including industrial designers, beverage makers, artists, farmers, retail stores, health practitioners, wellness experts, cosmetics manufacturers, nonprofit organizations, innovators in sustainable practices, and libraries. Go to tectoniclaw.com to learn more about how Tectonic Law can help your business thrive. tectoniclaw.com. Rock solid representation for groundbreaking industries.
This portion of TV Confidential is brought to us by our friends at Front Porch Realty, the community of realtors in the Northern Bay Area of California that is committed to finding the solution that is best for their clients. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or looking to sell or lease your property in Northern California, call Karen Strain at 415-886-7411 or visit frontporchrealtygroup.com for more information on how they can help you.
Ed Robertson, thanking you for listening to the TV Confidential podcast. If you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss our next episode.
Hi, this is Paul Dooley. You're listening to TV Confidential. Good luck.
Okay, let's take them. Now, wait a minute. I've never even heard these boys sing. All right?
All right. They're not going no place.
All right, cover all exits. Let's go. Come on, hurry up. Who wants an orange whip? Orange whip? Orange whip? 3 orange whips.
John Candy, A Life in Comedy, available right now wherever books are sold through House of Anansi Books, houseofanansi.com, as well as Amazon.com, where books are sold online. We mentioned earlier Paul has several appearances coming up over the next several weeks, including appearances in Berkeley, San Francisco, Portland, and New York City. Details and more information, houseofanancy.com. Type in John Candy, A Life in Comedy book tour. One of the other overriding themes that comprise the arc of John Candy's life story, Paul, is that with the possible exception of Richard Pryor, he was critic-proof. I mean, virtually everybody who knew him or watched his work loved him.
Yeah. I, for instance, one of the big revelations was I had never heard about Richard Pryor just not taking to John Candy. Just something about John Candy rubbed Richard Pryor the wrong way. And I even thought to myself, maybe it's just everyone thought that. Maybe Richard Pryor actually is on record somewhere. Again, another person I can't ask.
Yeah.
But then you read, I cited in the book Paul Mooney, who worked with Pryor. He was his writer, and kind of close in the inner circle of Richard Pryor. Writes in the book that he absolutely did not like John Candy, and I can only say that maybe Pryor didn't feel comfortable sharing the billing with the guy. Maybe Pryor felt that the two comedy styles were different. There could be a lot of judgment from what he thought Candy represented. There's a lot of, just basically it could have been Richard's insecurity.
Could be.
And I say Richard like I knew him, but Richard Pryor, one of the greatest, by the way.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor, one of the greatest, and we're still talking about Richard Pryor today. And he was insecure. So that to me, because I can honestly say that based on everything I read and people I talked to, Candy did nothing to make Richard Pryor feel bad.
Yeah,
except maybe show up.
Yeah,
be really good.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those mysteries that maybe say more about him than it did about John Candy. We'll never know, but you do your best to piece that story together and let the reader decide for themselves. Which is one of the many things you do in John Candy, A Life in Comedy, available now, houseofanancy.com. Paul will be back next week for part 2 of our conversation. We'll talk about John Candy's work on SCTV, plus we'll look at 2 instances in John Candy's film career when art imitated life, one of which occurred in Stripes, the other in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Part 2 of a conversation with Paul Myers, author of John Candy, A Life in Comedy, next week on TV Confidential. In the meantime, A Screenwriter's Companion, The First Cylinder, Rod Serling at 100, and Comfort and Joy by Joseph Doherty, available Fayetteville Mafia Press as well as Amazon.com, while Rhonda Shear, Up All Night, premieres Saturday, October 25th, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on the Kings of Horror channel on YouTube. For more on Rhonda Shear, RhondaShear.com, RhondaShearUpAllNight.com. Ed Robertson, Beth, Tony Figueroa, Donna Allen, Phil Grace, and Susan Silver. Thank you so much for listening. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll talk to you next time on TV Confidential.